Thank you for joining us for WMKV Cares here on 89.3 FM and 89.9 FM. We are bringing you a special pre-recorded show today as we are at the opening on October 22nd of a special photographic exhibit called George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen, documenting Cincinnati's neighborhoods. A lot of hubbub here. We are just getting ready for the opening. We'll have some red carpet interviews here as people are arriving for the opening. But this special exhibit is running through December 21st at the Skirball Museum at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. We'll be featuring some interviews from this. We'll also be taking you to some comments from the opening ceremony, and we hope that you'll stay with us here on WMKV Cares, a very exciting photographic exhibit that shows both architecture and humanity at Skirball Museum at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati. We are here at the Skirball Museum at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion with Abby Schwartz from the Skirball Museum. Abby, we are here at a very special opening. This exhibition, as part of Photo Focus, is going to be running through December 21st. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing.
Sure. This exhibition is called George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen, Documenting Cincinnati's Neighborhoods. And it is a collection of photographs by 3 photographers, all who were working at roughly the same time in Cincinnati. The photographs that are on view here at the Skirball are the photographs of Ransohoff and Rosenthal. And they are very interesting. They work well together. The Rosenthal photographs are all architectural photographs, some details, some full buildings, basically a commission that was done in the late 1950s to document the history of the West End, which was slated for demolition. The Ransohoff photographs really document the human condition. They're about people in neighborhoods that were impoverished in Cincinnati, certainly some of them in the West End, although unfortunately Danny Ransohoff did not identify or label his photographs.
In fact, that brings a very interesting point to our conversation in the fact that you are encouraging people that if they recognize someone or some aspect of one of these photographs from the Ransohoff collection, that you're asking them to let people know. How can they do that?
Well, there are 2 ways. Outside the exhibition, there are cards that can be filled out with people's memories or reminiscences about the places they're seeing, or they can do it online through a Facebook page that we've dedicated to this. And I also want to make the point, yes, we want them to help us identify perhaps some of the Ransohoff photographs, but even the Rosenthal photographs are locations that no longer exist primarily. There are a few that are still standing, but we believe that people will have memories of some of these homes and businesses, and that they'll tell us their memories, and that we can then make that an ongoing project, and that this is really the beginning of a conversation.
I have to say also you have a photograph of Mr. Rosenthal and a photograph of Mr. Ransohoff here. Having known Dan Ransohoff in my lifetime, that is one of the greatest pictures. It sums up Dan Ransohoff. I never had a chance to meet Mr. Rosenthal, but Dan Ransohoff, that is a fantastic picture. If you see nothing else in this exhibit, get down here and see Dan Ransohoff in his element.
I totally agree with you. It is quintessential Danny. He is in this office where you or I could never find anything, but clearly he knew where everything was. It is so disheveled, so messy, and the counterpoint is this totally put together, beautiful portrait of George Rosenthal, who was an executive with S. Rosenthal and Company, the printing company. Danny was a social worker. He lived in the element of his work, and they are completely polar photographs, but very indicative of the people they represent.
We are here in the gallery on the 4th floor of the Skirball Museum here at Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion. We're looking at a sign right across from us that says, "The Corridor Exhibit, Our Visible Poor," by Daniel J. Ransohoff. An actual artifact from these photos is right here among this, as well as a couple of cases of other artifacts, including pictures, Rolodexes, the Jewish tour of Cincinnati. It is really something to see.
Oh, thank you. Well, we are so lucky to have the families of all 3 photographers either in town or available to us across the country. We have the technology to be in touch with them, and we have cameras from both Danny and George. We have Danny's famous 3 4-part Rolodex, which is just insanely huge.
That is a Rolodex on steroids.
Exactly. And we have all 3 of the portfolio magazines that George Rosenthal published. It was a beautiful, perfect bound on the best paper available magazine for artists and graphic designers. It only survived for 3 issues because they would not buy advertising because they did not want to tarnish this beautiful publication with ads. So all 3 of the published portfolios are here, and as you said, publications of Danny Ransohoff from his social work and his interest in photography and his very famous Jewish tour of Cincinnati, which he also did a general tour of Cincinnati and was famous for taking visitors around. He loved his city.
We're here with Abby Schwartz, director of the Skirball Museum at Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion, and we are speaking here on the opening night, which is October 22nd. This exhibit runs through December 21st. What are the times that people can come down to see these wonderful photographs, to see these artifacts, and how do people find out more?
The museum is open on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 4 and on Sundays from 1 to 5. You can visit the museum by appointment. If you go on our website at www.huc.edu and click on museums, all of that information will come up. And there are a couple of public programs that are in connection with the show, which you can also find on our website.
Do you anticipate any schools or classes coming down to see this?
Yes, we do. We already have been getting calls about school visitations and civic groups. It'll be a great show for anybody that's interested in Cincinnati history.
We'll also be hearing some excerpts from the opening ceremonies here later in WMKV Cares, but I just want to let everybody know once again that this is the exhibit George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen, documenting Cincinnati's neighborhoods. The Ben Rosen photos are actually in the American Jewish Archives here at HUC.
That's correct. And Ben Rosen was a very well-known photographer, taking pictures from the 20s all the way through the 80s. His photographs were given to the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives, and he did photographs for the Catholic Telegraph and for the American Israelite and had a special interest in Cincinnati landmarks. There are some wonderful photographs of places, again, that no longer exist, the Albee Theater, some wonderful photographs from the 1937 flood, other landmarks like Fountain Square that look so different today, and Government Square, but are recognizable to current-day Cincinnati. And so that's a must, and we'll be going over there directly from the opening ceremony here over to the AJA.
And I was going to say, until you mentioned the 37 flood, I was going to say this is an immersive experience, but I think it still is. But thank you so much, Abby, for taking a few moments here with us. Again, if people want more information,
www.huc.edu or call 487-3098.
And the last thing I wanted to ask, because I think a lot of people say, well, this is at Skirball, so it must be just a Jewish exhibit or something about Jewish culture. This extends well beyond just Jewish culture or Jewish faith.
It does. The 3 photographers happen to be Jewish, and we are lucky to have these photographs, which are actually the Ransohoff and Rosenthal, I should say, belong to the Cincinnati History Museum, to the museum center, but they have graciously allowed us to display these photographs, and they tell a great story about Cincinnati, and they tell a great story about social responsibility, which are values we can all appreciate.
And once again, even Scott Gamper here this evening as well from Cincinnati Museum Center, which is another kindred spirit of ours. And this is all part of the large, literally, group of exhibits all around Cincinnati, and it's great that Skirball's involved. So this is wonderful. It's nice when you walk up to the door and you see that this is a photo-focused location.
Yes. We're happy to be on that bandwagon, and it's a biennial celebration of photography, over 50 venues, and we are proud to be associated with it.
Coming to the podium now at the Skirball Museum, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Cohen, who is the Dean of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati.
I would not have the time to thank everyone who's been involved in this amazing project if we stood here for 90 minutes or 120 minutes. I'm not going to even try, but I will say that what we have here this evening would not be here and would absolutely not be possible but for the director of our Skirball Museum, Abby Schwartz.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank all of you. This is just amazing. I could not be more pleased with the response to tonight's opening. And the reason it happened, there are a lot of reasons, not the least of which is our association with Photo Focus, this incredible citywide biennial celebration of photography. Another reason why we have such an incredible turnout is the families of these amazing photographers. The Rosenthal, Ransohoff, and Rosen families have been generous with names and addresses and emails and all kinds of things to encourage people to share this wonderful opportunity to see this work. What we'd like to do now is to welcome a member of each of those families to say just a few words about their father, their uncle, and to be able to give you some little bit of insight into these men. So first, please join me in welcoming Henry Rosenthal, who is joined today by his mother, Jean Rosenthal Block, his sister, Julie Baker, and I believe there are other family members.
All right. Well, first I want to thank you, Abby, for creating this lovely evening and presentation of my father, George, and my friend, Daniel, or Uncle, as we used to call him, of course, their photographs. My father was what they used to call a character, slightly larger-than-life personality, full of mischief. From his birth in 1922 to his death at age 44 in 1967, he lived in Cincinnati, or Cincinnati, in the local vernacular. Clearly, I've lost my accent after leaving here in 1973 to move to California. For his 12th birthday, his parents presented him with a Kodak Brownie, never imagining it would ignite his lifelong love of photography. Upon his return from military service in 1943, he beseeched his father to release him from his obligations at the S. Rosenthal Printing and Publishing Company, the family business founded by my great-grandfather, to attend a summer session of what started as the new Bauhaus, but transitioned to the Chicago School of Design. The School of Art and Design was the reincarnation of the legendary German Bauhaus, forcibly shut down by the Nazis. There he studied under the famed original Bauhaus instructor, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, clearly a watershed experience that informed the rest of his life. I have to add this. Tonight, a friend pointed out to me one of my father's photographs of a record store that was probably the record store that was started by Sid Nathan, the head of King Records. Again, another tie into my life. I was able to acquire years ago the desk that was housed in the King Records building that belonged to James Brown, my prized possession today. So again, the connections I'm getting tonight are just incredible. So please enjoy this rare opportunity to view some of my father's extraordinary work, and I hope that you have an opportunity to see more of it in the future. Thank you so much.
I'd like to now welcome Paul Ransohoff, Danny Ransohoff's nephew, who will speak on behalf of the Ransohoff family, but I do have to just acknowledge, it's in writing upstairs, but this exhibition really would not be happening were it not for Regine Ransohoff sitting me down when I was visiting with her about a completely different exhibition and saying, you know, the History Museum has these Ransohoff and Rosenthal photographs. They knew each other, they were neighbors, they were doing this at the same time. You ought to have a show. So here we are. So Regine, thank you.
It's an honor and a pleasure to represent the Ransohoff family at the opening of this wonderful event. As Abby mentioned, that this exhibit is very much the brainchild of Regine Ransohoff, who was struck by the coincidence that two members of her actual and extended family were talented photographers who had both, in their own distinctive ways, captured aspects of the West End in the 1940s and 50s. Looking around at Dan's photos upstairs, you cannot help but get an immediate and strong impression of Dan's take on the world. Just as Dorothea Lange documented the rural poor who migrated west in the 1930s, Dan turned to the plight of the disadvantaged who migrated north to urban ghettos in the 30s and 40s. The people and situations depicted are often stark, occasionally spontaneous, but more often carefully composed. The figures are distinct individuals, yet representative. Each one tells a story, and they convey deep emotion, sometimes lightness, bravery, or persistence on top of a current of darkness, but quite often direct pathos and a sense of shared suffering. The sharing is both between the figures in the photos as well as between the subject and the viewer. Let me tell you a little bit about Dan's background for those who did not know him well. Now, I believe it must be very few people who did not know Dan well, because if you didn't, you're probably too young or you lived in a cave. Because Dan was that gregarious, omnipresent, and omnivorous. He made it a point to know everyone. His spirit was unique, but he came by this work honestly. It conveys something central about the spirit of his life's project, and also represents the personal development of a strand of family tradition. While his Ransohoff side was distinguished in medicine, his maternal grandfather, N. Henry Beckman, was a rags-to-riches immigrant to this city. He left his parents, Wolf and Getty, in Bavaria at the age of 19. And one of N. Henry's first acts of philanthropy upon attaining financial success was to found the Beckman Dispensary in their honor to provide health care to indigent Jewish families. He later contributed generously in the name of his parents to the Jewish hospital. Dan's mother, Martha, was a specialist in child development and early childhood education who felt compelled at all times to be teaching a lesson. His father, Nathan, ran a machine shop and strongly identified with the working man. It was he who took his sons around every part of the town, making sure they were not limited to their cultural and socioeconomic bubble, and were exposed to the range of human conditions. In addition to the emotional impact, Dan's photos convey a vivid sense of place and time. Dan was a do-gooder in the old-fashioned and best sense of the word. He felt for human suffering, documented it for us to see and know through his eyes, and to attune our sense of sympathy, calling, and purpose. Looking around this room and at the pictures upstairs, people here, I feel that through this exhibit, Dan is speaking to us still, speaking in the royal we, and through images, he and the figures he captured call to you and to us to respond to his representation of these citizens of Cincinnati as embodiments of his vision and of our shared plight and our common purpose.
We are bringing you excerpts of the opening ceremonies of George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen, documenting Cincinnati's neighborhoods. It is running now at the Skirball Museum at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, through December 21st, 2014.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Frankel, Director of Programs at the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives. On behalf of Dr. Gary Zola, Executive Director, and all of us at the AJA, I want to thank all of those at the Hebrew Union College, Photo Focus, and especially Abby Schwartz at the Skirball, who have partnered with us to make available the beautiful printed images of these iconic Jewish photographers who have captured the essence of Cincinnati's West End and beyond. The Ben Rosen collection, which is housed at the AJA, contains prints, negatives, slides, and papers of unique individuals whose career spans 75 years. Included are images of sports stars, politicians, and dignitaries, together with local street and urban scenes, as well as people and events around Cincinnati. Rosen's work for the American Israelite and the Catholic Telegraph documented religious life in Cincinnati. What you will be seeing this evening is only one small part of Rosen's vast life's work. We at the AJA are proud to serve as the stewards for this unique documentary history of our Queen City. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to meet Ben's daughter, Merle, who was instrumental in gathering Ben's materials and placing it in the hands of the archival professionals of the AJA so that it can be saved and accessed for not only all of you this evening, but for all those interested for generations to come. Merle is the oldest of 3 children of Ben and Ellie, who were married for 60 years. Merle, an artist in her own right, has worked in a wide variety of mediums for more than 40 years. So join me in welcoming Merle Rosen.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. 1943. Dad was the sole support of his family. He had sisters, he had a father His mother died in 1930, so the war was on, and he was working full-time as a photographer in Cincinnati. And he was drafted. And he was part of the photo reconnaissance. The U.S. Army Air Force had photo reconnaissance teams. I'm guessing here, but I think it was around 200 men per unit. And I just reread his service record. So it started in Clearwater, Florida. Then it went to Denver. He went to Denver. And then he ended up in North Carolina. And basically, my father was interested in three things: going to movies, women, and photography. And his diary goes back and forth among all of these things. So he had told me this one story about the photo reconnaissance. So, I mean, these guys learned everything. How to develop in the field, how to dig an 8-foot hole and build a dark room in the ground if you were behind enemy lines. They learned all kinds of things, and he was developing film till he turned 90 when I gave him his first digital camera, and then he shifted into the digital world. Meanwhile, Army, so he's being moved around. He was in the 34th Recon, and then they switched him to the 33rd Recon. And the diary ends with the 33rd Recon. He has almost completed the training. But the 33rd is ready to ship on a warship to the European theater. And he is then switched to the 34th, which is who he spent the remainder of the war with. The 33rd went across the ocean. It was shot out of the water by German U-boats. Everyone died. My father went 2 weeks later with the 34th. They ended up in England, and what they did was they followed Patton around. And the pilots of this team did not have bombs in the bomber bay. They had cameras. And they would strafe over the English Channel 15 feet above the water to avoid German radar. And they would take pictures. Many of them did not make it back. But they would take pictures. They would bring back the pictures. The cameras were loaded into the bomber bays. And then 34th Recon would develop pictures all night. And they would have them ready for the Army in the mornings, basically so they could plan D-Day. And that's what these guys did. They developed, they didn't have guns, they had cameras, they had film, they had a darkroom. There are hundreds of stories, there are thousands of pictures. He shot for 80 years. I'm happy to talk to anybody when we walk across the street about his pictures, his life. He loved what he did to the very last day. The last picture he took, he died in Chicago in 2008. He was at his 60-something reunion with the 34th Recon. My mother, was the first time he had not been with her. She had Alzheimer's. He left her in Cincinnati, and my brother met him in Chicago, and some of the last pictures he shot were of a blonde sunbathing on the roof of his hotel. And then he got to see all of his buddies, and he went to sleep, and he looked at my brother and said, it was after midnight, my brother had come in from friends, and he said, just remember, get sleep because we have a lot to do tomorrow. And he went to bed, and in seconds he died. And he had this fabulous life that he loved every minute of it. So those are my stories. Please look at the photos. Thank you, everybody.
We are here with Scott Gamper from Cincinnati Museum Center. They are an instrumental part of this as well, and we are talking at George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen, documenting Cincinnati's neighborhoods. Scott, what a kindred spirit this is to be working with Skirball, I think, on this.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great collaboration, and when Abby Schwartz from Skirball came to us and said she had this great idea to feature or highlight the work of George Rosenthal and Danny Ransohoff, I thought that was absolutely great. Two remarkable men who left a tremendous photographic legacy, and to see it highlighted is really nice.
George S. Rosenthal, a very wonderful picture of George S. Rosenthal, but my favorite photo of this entire exhibit that I've seen so far is Daniel Ransohoff in that office.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You know, there's some surprising aspects to George Rosenthal's photography. There's a whole body of baseball photographs that he took. He took jazz musicians. There's buildings under construction, the built environment, all kinds of things. And like Danny, he also took photographs that documented social conditions in Cincinnati. And maybe that's some of the most powerful photography from the two men is that work.
Now, I want to make sure that we get an extra plug in because we do a lot of work with Cincinnati Museum Center as well, and the incredible photographic collection at Cincinnati History Museum. What we're seeing here is just the tip of the iceberg of some of these photographs because we're in a fairly limited space. It is still something to see. The Rosenthal pictures are largely architectural for this because what it does is it kind of provides the yin and the yang. We have the Rosenthal architectural photos, and then we have more of the human condition and a few architectural photos from Ransohoff.
Well, that's right. And actually, George Rosenthal was hired by the Cincinnati Historical Society in the 1950s to document the architecture in the West End before the clearing began. So he produced this documentary record of this really wonderful architecture. And then Danny, of course, captured social conditions and some parts of the city that maybe were not the best parts of the city to look at, but it was an important aspect of Cincinnati's history. He documented that. So again, very powerful photography, but very different.
Speaking here with Scott Gamfer from Cincinnati Museum Center, who you hear on Union Terminal Time many times. Now we have him here on WMKV Cares as we profile the opening of Documenting Cincinnati's Neighborhoods. Scott, this is all part of Photo Focus. For those people who may not be familiar with Photo Focus, I know Cincinnati Museum Center has been involved in so many ways.
That's right. Photo Focus is an event that occurs every 2 years, and the whole purpose of it is to take the month of October and to celebrate photography in all of its various forms, historic photography, art photography, documentary photography, through a citywide series of events, lectures, exhibits, programs of every sort. It's a wonderful thing because there's such a rich photographic history here in Cincinnati, and it gives us an opportunity to get that out and to drum up, get a buzz going in Cincinnati about photography. It's a wonderful thing.
And also, no good photographic exhibit is complete without at least a few artifacts. Behind me is a Rolodex, that I call it a Rolodex on steroids. It's amazing. That was Dan Ransohoff's Rolodex, some cameras, including an old Brownie, but also some wonderful displays here. And I know you haven't had a chance to necessarily see everything here yet. I'm catching you as you're walking right in the door. It's kind of a red carpet interview here. Wow. But also, they even have the Jewish tour of Cincinnati, but it goes beyond just a Jewish theme here. This is about humanity and about our architectural history.
Right, it is, and that is the great legacy of those two men. Very different men, but both had very interesting lives. But the big thing that they left behind is this body of documentary photographs that are still just as powerful today, if not more so, than when they were taken.
Very good. Scott, we'll look forward to having you on Union Terminal again soon, too.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it.
Once again, it's the George S. Rosenthal, Daniel J. Ransohoff, and Ben Rosen exhibit entitled Documenting Cincinnati's Neighborhoods at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion at Skirball Museum. It is running through December 21st of 2014. If you'd like more information, you can find it online at www.huc.edu, and you can get more information there on hours for the exhibition, as well as finding out more about Skirball and Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Thanks for joining us for this special program on WMKV and WLHS, streaming around the world at WMKVFM.org.